All right. Hi, everyone. So, now that you have paused Paul's awesome talk on how to design a top grossing game and how to build those, how to plan for those, challenging games. But one thing which is now the next step of building those kind of games is, first of all, from my personal experience, I can say it's not easy to kind of execute on that ambitious vision. And how do you do that? How do you avoid common mistakes while developing those kind of games? So we are going to talk about how to address critical challenges in terms of building a scalable games. And for that, with me is Arvind Neelakantan. Arvind is currently a technology evangelist at Epic Games. Before this, he was also a technology head of Unity India, and he has been part of multiple gaming studios like Disney and Nickelodeon, where he worked on really ambitious games, including MMORPG. So, welcome, Arvind.
Thank you, Avinash, and thank you, LILA folks. I'm just excited to be here.
All right. So why me and Arvind on this topic is that Arvind has been helping Indian gaming studio from a very long time. He has deeper insights in terms of what kind of development we have been doing so far, and what are the common mistakes like we have seen which we can avoid upfront to kind of not affect our development in longer period of time. And the other thing which we are also going to talk about once your game is live. So this conference is like India free to play conference, and the difference between a free to play game and I would say a casual game or a hyper casual game is that these games are not only one time published games, they are like services. So when you build a game, you have to support that game for a very long time in terms of technical updates, content updates, and also live ops. So let's directly jump into the topic, Arvind. And my first question to you is, from your experience of working with so many Indian gaming studios, what are the common mistakes you have seen in terms of early development of games in India, and how can those studios avoid those mistakes?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and thanks for asking that, because one of the things that I usually see game studios I have a whole bunch of a list, right? But let me highlight some of the things. Like the first thing is folks who are going to be making games, who have a big game idea, should be playing games, and that I see is a big. It's kind of moving away. We are seeing game studios evolving, but I know a lot of folks who started a game company, but they're kind of proud to say they have never played a game before. Which kind of seems to be an antithesis. It's like a movie director saying I've never seen any movies, and yet I'm here. I am making a movie, right? So my advice would be that. And second, or already seeing a lot of uh, money that can be made out of games, because it is in fact the largest entertainment vertical in the world. It has surpassed movies and music long time ago. And it's not and while game making is definitely a business, it is also a very technical business. So my advice for folks who are going to be who are establishing game studios would be also to get technical resources on the highest level, and not just designers or not just business folks, but also to get the best engineers, who, because at the end of the day, the game is of course a very engineered, and it's pretty much a centerpiece of the game itself. So investing in a CTO, investing in a technical director, investing in a senior resource upfront before you start a game, or before you start a game studio, is paramount. And so those are the typical things I see. Now there are also mistakes that we can talk about once the game development itself starts. But I don't want to get too deep into that, because it's really unique to how each game setup itself is. But fundamental things like having version control, having a open and flat environment in order to better communicate with each other, having a fairly flexible and creative a game designer who can work around the constraints of what the engineering talent can bring in. There's a whole list of those things, but for me, though, the first two things I mentioned uh, about having a strong technical team, and then having a good sense of of how to make games is very important.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. And there are, as you said, there are multiple things which you have to get right when you are just starting the
Hmm.
development.
Hmm.
One thing I would add is, which many studios I have seen get wrong, is
Hmm.
the differentiation between prototype and production. So,
Hmm.
when you are building a game, first of all, you have to prototype your risks. So,
Hmm.
if you are just cloning a game, which is, already there, everything is clear, like, hey, this
Right.
is exactly what you are going to make. And then, you can follow a waterfall model and just, come up with a roadmap. But if you're
Hmm.
building challenging game, validate your hypothesis upfront by building lots of prototypes. So that is one
Correct.
thing. And the second thing, understand the difference between prototype and production. I have seen one mistake
Hmm.
studios making is like they have something working in prototype, they see it in the build or whatever platform they're building it, and they just you know bring that prototype inside production. And then
Correct. Yeah.
because they want to move fast, they want to develop that game in 6 months
Yeah.
or what timeline they have.
Yeah.
They don't realize the problem at that moment, but once
Mhm.
you are deeper into development pipeline, now it's been like you have multiple features on top of it, and now you start testing to go live, and you start seeing so many issues. And then
Correct. Yeah.
then you end up spending almost equal amount of time as building something from scratch rather than just building on top of
Yeah.
prototype.
No, absolutely. I think that is true from a technical standpoint too. For Unreal Engine, folks saw the Unreal Engine 5 demo, the Valley of the Ancient, and they're like, "Hey, can we do it on mobile?" I'm like, "Nope, God, don't do that. Yeah, just because you are seeing it doesn't mean it's going to work over there." Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so this brings me to the next question, which is, and we already spoke about. So when you are starting a development, and let's talk specifically about India, people have this choice of choosing a game engine. So
Hmm.
as a studio or as a developer, like when you are making this call, what are the things which you should think about before actually choosing a game engine?
Well, see, game engines today or pretty much most of the game engines have very similar offerings, I would say. But what you would have to choose in a game engine, and I'll talk maybe specifically about Unreal Engine because that's where I'm from, is because Unreal Engine is predominantly for console games, and there's also enough games on mobile. So you need to know where you're going to be publishing the game to. Like, who is going to be your audience? Is your game going to be on mobile? Is your game going to be on console? Is your game going to be on a browser? Is it going to be on a Facebook Messenger kind of a game? And at the end of the day, optimization plays a very important role. So whatever game engine that you're going to be choosing needs to be optimized for the platform that you're going to be deploying to. And second thing is also the ability for artists and this is something that I'm recurringly seeing in studios, is that the ability for artists and non-programmers to contribute greater or even better into the game development process itself. Early on in my and that's changing with game engines today, but early on in my game development process, the engineers used to do, like myself, right, myself included, used to do all the artwork. Like, they'll just, like, the artist would just throw a Maya file at me, and then I'll have to like integrate that into Unreal Engine, and then or they'll throw a UI at me, like a Photoshop file, and then I have to like integrate that into the engine. And of course, I'm a fundamentally a programmer, so the artistic vision is probably not going to be realized in its full potential or its full imagination as a designer can be. So I would say, and game engines these days are fast evolving to include artists and non-programmers into the game development process. And I would say any engine, including Unreal Engine, which allows for better productivity, would be a good choice to begin with, after you have figured out that it is an optimized engine for you to work on.
Correct. And I think
Yeah.
as a developer, you have to understand that you know your game better than anybody else. So,
Correct.
first of all, you have to kind of pinpoint like, hey, these are the critical areas of our game. So, no, I
Hmm.
have seen games where maybe visual fidelity is not that important, but there are
Right.
games where visual fidelity is the key element of your game. So,
That's
if
right.
that will be the key player of your game mechanic, then, choose the engine based on that. Like, hey, this is non-negotiable for us. Can the engine which we are going to choose support that? If not, then that's where your answer is. So,
Yep.
figuring out like what are the key elements of your game. And the other thing which I personally feel is that capabilities. So,
Hmm.
how much time do you have to invest in learning something new? So
Correct.
I had a talk with Tommy, who had built his own game engine for a very famous game called Vainglory. And
Mm-hmm.
my question to him was like, "Hey, who should build the game engine?" So there is this common interest going on in engineers, especially like they want to
Yeah.
make their game engines. But
Yeah.
if you look at the current state of game engines, they have evolved so much. So like if you have to build your engine to support features which you get out of the box in Unreal, Unity, then you would be spending like years just getting to those features before actually having that inside your game. So
Correct.
if you
Yeah.
are planning to make your game engine, good for learning, but unless you have millions of dollars resources to invest in that, I think that choice should be very clear in your
Yeah,
mind.
absolutely. Like, there was like at the end of the day, you have to tell your story. The story is your game, and making something from scratch just because you can, or just because you want to, is absolutely a sink of time and money. If someone has already done it, then I would say leverage that and start using that rather than doing something from scratch. And I'm a big proponent of that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So one of the powerful things about current game engines is you develop once and then you can publish it on multiple platforms. So, and most of the studios nowadays, kind of whenever they do a game development, they always plan for multiple platforms. So,
Mhm.
from your experience, if somebody is building a game, how should they approach this problem? Like, for example, they want to make for mobile, they want to publish it on console like Xbox, PlayStation, PC. How should they plan their development pipeline to kind of address this thing in long term?
See, for my advice would be aim for your lowest common denominator at the beginning, because if you are going to be making a game for your shittiest device, and pardon the language, then it's easier to add on top of it to support higher end consoles, for example. So if you're going to be supporting a 2,000 rupees phone, Android device, and making your game at the beginning for that kind of a device, and then planning for a higher end console is a lot easier than doing it the other way, where you're going to be making a massive game with 5K, or sorry, 8K assets, for example, and then bringing it down to a mobile device is going to be very painful. And when you and planning kind of at least upfront, like if you even have like long-term plans of putting it on a low-end device, it's better to plan for it, especially when it comes to assets. So make sure that if you have the same game on a mobile, then make sure that you are planning for low resolution textures, low quality meshes upfront. Even though that might not be your first platform, but planning for it definitely helps. When it also comes to multiplayer games, for PC and console, the protocol matters a lot. One of the earliest, and this is like an anecdotal thing that it kind of throws back to your prototype versus production kind of a thing, right? When I was at my previous company, at in Los Angeles at Nickelodeon, we had this prototype of getting, which is a massively multiplayer online game. And the prototype was just like dumping the inventory of the player through a TCP,
Right.
and it was great work during a prototype. But then, as the game grew and more people started acquiring more and more items, we noticed a slowdown in the game, and we had no idea what it was until we realized thousands of items were just like passed through a TCP, which then crashed the game itself, because it just wasn't able to process that huge JSON file, which we then changed to a REST request later on. But those kinds of awareness of what your device is capable of in terms of processing power, in terms of optimization, and planning for your lowest common denominator upfront, and then adding on top of it is a lot easier than doing it the other way. And this applies for both client-based development, server-based development, and also tools.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, you brought up a very important point here about multiplayer games. So,
Mm,
for cross-platform, when you are
mm,
choosing, most probably, I would always say that's our actually next topic which we are going to discuss is build versus buy. So, if, for
mm,
example, if you're using a game engine, you
mm,
decided to use that game engine, and once
mm,
you are deeper in the pipeline, it will be very hard for you to change. And
mm.
same applies for example, if you are using a multiplayer service. So, if you are building for cross-platform, you have to also see the capabilities of that technical solution. So
Correct.
maybe that works for mobile, but if you are very serious about cross platform, then see whether that technology can support that particular platform. So if you are choosing a networking library and on mobile, for example, you are running your servers on 10 or 20 tick rate, see
Mhm.
if that framework can support 60 tick rate when you are on console, because you cannot run a 20 tick rate game or shooter game, let's say for
Yeah,
example, on console. So see whether that particular library can support that. So that after 1 year, once your mobile title is done and now you have to publish on console, you find out that you're already so deep into your integration pipeline that it's very hard for you to take that out.
correct.
These
Yeah,
are
and that's the planning part, right? Like making sure that you plan for it, test it. Prototyping is good, of course. You don't need to take the prototype to production, but prototyping and making sure that stuff works and in an optimized fashion is very important. I also want to add one more thing, like especially when you're talking about different platforms, and this is something maybe we'll discuss later down the line. Uh, is also testing needs to be planned for, because if you're already thinking of publishing to even just Android, and Android has like thousands of variants these days. But if you're planning for that, then making a good plan for testing upfront also helps a lot, because involving QA upfront or quality assurance folks upfront has always paid dividends, because they're able to find nuances uh, early on, because they're able to because that's what they do, and planning for that also helps for especially for multi cross-platform game development. Yeah.
Right. So I'll just summarize, because this is a very important point.
Yeah.
Three things on top of my head. One is you have to plan your content pipeline in a way that even if you're going for mobile, you have idea how will you develop that content pipeline for cross platform. Second,
Mhm.
choice of technology. When you are choosing
Mhm.
any technology which is going to be critical part of your game, make sure it can support the platform which you are going to develop it on. And the third one, which was very interesting, that is plan for QA. If
Yeah,
you're going to any platform, have that plan ready for that.
that's right.
Let's talk about this, and this is very specific to I would say Indian gaming industry also. And I have seen this mistake happening multiple times in our industry. That is build versus buy. So, and I'll take an example of lots of available assets right now. So even if you go to Unreal, you will find lots of assets which are already there, and they look amazing. Like if you want to build a shooter game, you can find lots of shooter templates. Same with Unity or any other things. So and this again, this is related to our prototype versus production thing, where you build the prototype, but make sure that when you bring it to production, you are aware that what are the limitations of that. So what are your thoughts on, have you seen this kind of mistake happening where people just use a asset which is not capable enough, and then they build the game, and then later on they realize like, hey, we are now constrained by the limitations of this particular asset, and how should they approach
Well,
that?
well, it goes both ways, right? In my experience, I think personally, I think the marketplace is a great place for you to start making a game from, because you don't have to you don't have to make, or you're not blocked by art in order to start making your game upfront. And I would encourage that. I think it's a good place to be. It's also a great place for you to learn. Like if you're building an environment and you want to know how that environment was put together, if you already have the environment, then you can kind of just dissect it and then figure out how things work. Which again brings me back to my favorite topic of optimization, which is if you need to be a, really good at optimizing existing code and existing assets. You need to know the fundamentals of it. If you're unaware of the fundamentals of optimization, then you are playing a very risky game, which is kind of what I said earlier. Like, you see value of ancients, and then you're like, let me put it on mobile, and then it'll just crash, and then you do have no idea why it worked, why it did work. And you need to be aware of that. Uh, you know, and that said, if you are going to be buying an asset, I would say please go for it,
Right.
but also be aware of what that asset is capable of.
Right.
And once you buy the asset, you own the asset. It's your responsibility to make sure that you know what it is all about. Like the environments or like high poly character art that you're going to be getting, you need to know how to optimize it, how to break it down. Of course, Unreal itself has anticipated it, and inside Unreal you can break down a lot of meshes down to lower LODs, For example, and an environment, you can turn off and on certain features that don't necessarily work on devices. Of course, the engines help you out with that, but at the end of the day, you need to be aware of what you're buying and
Yeah.
be aware of the optimization processes itself, and that's kind of where it is. You
Right.
yeah, you just you need to be aware of how to optimize it and be cognizant of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for the business people, I would say who are not too much into technology, is that if you are using some existing assets, ask
Mhm.
questions about the capability of that asset. So one common mistake happens is because as a business person, you always see how it looks rather than what all capabilities you might have inside. So ask
Correct.
questions like, our game needs this, can this asset support that later on, and have the plan to build it, or just buy it again from a different
Yeah.
asset. No, I
Yeah.
think the more aware you are about the asset, the better choices you will make.
Yeah, and on the other side, right, like when I was at Disney, you were seeing a plethora of endless runner games, right? Everyone was making endless runners all the time. And in that case, I would say, like, if you found an asset in the marketplace that already has the endless runner kind of working,
Hmm.
use that. I have no problem with that. Like, why rebuild something when you have a template that's already there, and then optimize it, or swap the assets if that works for you, because it just saves time, because it's anyway kind of a game that you that has a, although it's an endless runner, it has a short life really. So that's kind of what you're looking at there.
Yeah. And now that we are talking about games as a services, and I see Epic making big moves in that area with
Yeah.
Epic Online Services, and backend as a service has been like really critical part in terms of moving gaming industry forward. So what are your thoughts in terms of as a, for example, you are a new game studio and you
Hmm.
already have so many challenges of building a game, like you have to build a team, you have to kind of come up with technology plan, like what are the tools to use, and now you have a challenge of building live op tools where once your game is live, you want it to be configurable, you want to be able to change, do all those economy tools and everything else. So what are your thoughts on, like, using a backend as a service platform as compared to building something from scratch in-house?
Well, I would never recommend building any platform or service, your server side service in house itself,
Okay.
primarily because of two reasons. One, it's really hard to actually hire or even find a network engineer, right? In fact, I'm a server side engineer myself, and finding, like, fellow network engineers for games, because you will find people who will work on banking and fintech and all of those places, but game is a whole different beast. Finding engineers is hard. And second, a lot of similar to game engines itself, a lot of the server side capabilities of games are fairly boilerplate. So you have, like, your leaderboards, your inventory system, or you have your achievements, or you have your rooms where you want to place your players in, and most of those solutions have been solved for. Like, rather, the problems for them have been solved for. So resolving them for your game, unless it's like completely new kind of a game, which I really doubt it's got to be there. Um, it's better to use existing game. It's exactly like using a game engine versus writing a new game engine. And for me, I would say, like, if there is a service, and if you got to evaluate the kind of service too, because you have, like, example, Epic Online Services. It's been tried and tested on real-time multiplayer shooter games, for example, and so you have a pretty good uh, example, or pretty good use case of it being working, of it working really well. But if, let's say, you're making a turn-based game, and you don't really care about real-time, like TCP or UDP kind of protocols, you just probably are happy with the REST API. So great. So then figure out a service that works for you for that kind of a game, and evaluate what works. And and then if you have a network engineer, and if you are a engineer, like, who is able to figure out the server side of things, then work with the existing code that has been provided, rather than building something from scratch, because building something from scratch is hard. And like I said earlier, you got to concentrate on telling your story. Don't get sidetracked.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
one fear I have seen in studios is that they always think that these services are not configurable. And
Yeah.
to that, I would say that, they should evaluate them again, because some
Yeah.
of these platforms I have personally evaluated and they are pretty solid. There might be,
Yeah.
like, few things you might have to do in a indirect way, but
Right.
I have not seen many things which you cannot do using these services. So they are
Hmm.
pretty configurable right now. So,
Right.
and the engineers who are working on these services, they are pretty experienced engineers. So,
Yeah.
doing basically, at the end, when you are building a game, you have to try to avoid mistakes. So, do you want
Correct.
to avoid mistakes on the gameplay side, or do you want to make some mistakes on the backend side? So,
Yeah.
take one challenge at a time. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's also a really good idea to build a relationship with the service providers, because if you do have a unique capability, it's better to throw the problem at the folks who are making that service or providing that service, rather than you trying to figure it out yourself. Yeah, it's always good to have open communication with the developers. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say, shout out to backend as a service platforms. Give it a try. Like, it can save
Mm.
lots of money, lots of effort,
Yeah.
and can
Yeah.
really speed up your process. So,
Absolutely.
talking about the speeding up the process, like, um, time to market is very important for games, no matter what kind of game you are building. So, what
Yeah.
are the things which you can think on top of your head, like, hey, these are the process which companies can adopt to actually speed up the process, and
Mhm.
the basically time to market, like development process itself. And one thing which I personally feel maybe we can talk about is, some of those process might seem heavy in the start, but over the long run, they will kind of help you to
Yeah.
reduce the overall development time. So can you,
Yeah.
like, talk a little bit about this?
Sure. So, like I said earlier, technology is the back end of games, and you need to have a very strong technology to also support the game that you're going to be making. In terms of processes itself, let me get that out of the way first, right? In terms of processes, like production process, having a product manager or a designer who is flexible and understands the engine and the capabilities is usually the a huge thumbs up, right? Because they are the one who can smoothen the road to publishing. If there's something goes wrong, they're able to come up with something and a creative way of solving. And
Right.
second is also, as I mentioned earlier, involving QA upfront, the quality assurance team upfront, huge help. It makes no sense. You might probably feel that they're doing nothing in the early meetings because they're just kind of standing and looking around. But that helps a lot because they understand the product a lot more. So they're able to figure out bugs later on the process because they have been there throughout the entire process.
Right.
Now that's the production part. From a technical point of view, I am a big backer and a proponent of continuous integration. Everywhere I go, that's all I talk about: continuous integration. I've been making like Jenkins and Bamboo scripts like all my professional life. And continuous integration is extremely important because especially if you're doing like cross-platform games, or even forget just making an Android game because it has like thousands of variants. You don't want a poor developer to be staying up all night or staying up all day just making a build, because that's a complete waste of human resource, a complete waste of compute also.
Right.
Continuous integration processes and integrating that upfront and then making sure that it is all stable upfront, so it is able to make builds to multiple platforms and also able to deploy to QA resources pretty much automatically helps a lot. Second thing is also on peer reviews. When I know that someone else is going to be writing code, I know my code is going to be much better, because that's kind of how human beings are. But if
Right.
I know no one is going to be looking at my code, I'm not going to be looking at. I'm going to be writing shitty code. So ability and having those kinds of review process, which is enabled by your version control system, like GitHub, for example, automatically provides those kind of resources for you, is also something that will avoid bugs in the later process, the bugs that are hard to fix or even impossible to fix, and you are able to catch them upfront in those process. um, and you know and also importantly, and this is a more non-technical thing, but a general health check of your developers is also very important. Like when I was at Disney, I made sure everyone left at 6 p.m. And that's usually a good thing to keep the morale of your developers up. And that also, while it might seem kind of counterintuitive, but giving them enough because this is a creative process, giving them some time to soak on the creative process, even though it might be technical, also helps a lot, because you're then able to get a lot more from the developers if they're able to keep pace or keep a steady pace on the kind of development, rather than just throwing things at them like on the whim.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
this should also be part of the company culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about these processes, many studios think them as an overhead to start with. So
Correct.
making a build directly from editor or directly from Xcode or Android is still very simple.
Yeah.
Like you click the button and get done. No
Yeah.
upfront investment there.
Yeah.
But what we companies don't realize is that that process takes half hour, 1 hour a day, and then you multiply that by 40 days, 50 days. So you end up spending so much time rather
Yeah.
than spending few weeks to get your CI/CD pipeline working. And if there are any issues, fix that in the pipeline. So I think
Correct.
that's why it's a mentality and culture thing,
Yeah.
where when you see an issue, try to fix that in the pipeline rather than just try to get it
Yeah.
done at that point. And
Yeah,
that
no,
will
in fact, yeah, it reminds me of this T-shirt I got at Nickelodeon, where I always used to say, like, QA used to come back and say, like, hey, something didn't work, and I was like, what do you mean it didn't work? It works on my machine, right? And then I got a T-shirt saying, like, it works on my machine, right? Because that's all. And so yeah, and so that helps a lot too, like continuous integration, where you are able to make sure that it's not just working on one machine, it's working on the build machine is more important. And you're able to find bugs upfront, and make sure that that doesn't happen in production too. Yeah.
Yeah, and the second thing which you covered, peer review. I think code review is something which a company should take serious. And this is
Yeah.
again, you will not see the advantage of this like upfront, but over the
Mm-hmm.
period of time, the advantage which you will see, they will be like amazing. Not only in terms of code quality, but also code awareness, and also
Mm-hmm.
you have people in coming going in your company, so everybody understands the code base. So there are lots of advantages. So just invest some time in that as well. So I think we
Correct.
are very close to our time. So I have just one last question, Arvind, and that is now let's talk about now your game is live and you
Mm-hmm.
want to make your game configurable. You want to do live or quick economies. So how can you plan that upfront, like during your development process only, so that once your game is live, it is treated more as a service rather than
Mm-hmm.
just like every update you have to send update, you have to send.
Yeah, as a developer, I would say make everything API call based and everything loaded from the server if possible. Like, at least plan for it, including UI, including characters, including textures. Everything has to be configurable unless it's something that's like including levels. It doesn't have to be there at the launch of the game, but as a programmer, you need to be prepared for it. And the reason for that is, I've seen multiple times designers or marketing people, especially, they might very confidently say that a particular part of the game is not going to be dynamically updated. But they are humans, right? They're gonna make mistakes, and when it goes live, they're gonna realize that something needs to be updated on the fly, and it's unacceptable from a programmer point of view to then say it's not possible to make it configurable at least in the next build, because you got to anticipate for it. I did that mistake too. I usually I even got pissed off saying, like, why didn't you plan for this? Like, we got to plan for it better. But it's impossible to plan for it. So my advice would be, like, you got to plan for pretty much every element of your game to be something that can be pushed, something that can be updated as a from the server.
Right.
And if you plan for that, especially mobile games and especially free to play games, because it is a service and it is a live beast, you're able to then make changes a lot easier. um,
Correct.
and in fact, your previous company, they did a great job of building that engine, June engine, right? And that, I thought, was really cool. I thought the idea behind it was excellent.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what you should be prepared for. Like, pretty much every element of your game should be architected to be configurable, even though when you deploy it, it doesn't necessarily have to be configurable. And that
Right.
would be my choice. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I will just add two things, very specific points. One is since you are going to use either your backend service or backend as a service platform. So anyway, those platforms allow you to configure data part of your game, but
Yeah.
have content pipeline also planned in a way that you can download it. And many games
Mhm.
now cannot avoid it. Like you
Yeah.
have battle pass based games where you have to continuously keep shipping updates. So no, you cannot send your app update with every battle pass. You have to make your content downloadable. The other things I would say is, and this again goes back to solid principle of development, so it is not only about the code but also independent parts of your game. So for example,
Yeah.
you have an environment, so
Mhm.
design your environment in a way that your assets can be downloaded and replaced. So for
Correct.
example, that can help you in terms of multi-platform as well. So for low end Android devices, you can download low res
Exactly.
assets. For higher end, you can download higher assets. So I think this is also part of your content pipeline and as a live service.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I cannot agree more. Yeah.
All right, so I'll just take one question from the chat. It's here. So it's a question for you, Arvind. No,
Mhm.
this one. Where is that? This one. So Arvind, can you put some lights on automation testing on game testing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the game automating tests on gameplay is a hard thing to do. It's kind of I would say on the impossibility end, because it doesn't really work that way. But if you are going to be automating, but a lot of we have this MVC model, like the model viewer controller model that we all love in games. But a lot of, so that's kind of when it comes to the server side part of things, like things that gets pushed from the server, things that get parsed as a player inventory, for example, or player profile. Those things can be tested quite easily automatically when you're testing, and this saves a lot of time for QA too, because when you have continuous integration, you're going to make a build, and when you're making the build, all of these checkboxes are tested automatically. Things like parsing things, making sure that whatever is going to be pinged from the server is going to be coming in correctly, or whatever data that is stored locally as a profile, as a player profile, is also something that works correctly. And those might seem silly, and as a developer you're going to say that is never going to go wrong, but it will. Right, it will go wrong. And it's something that saves some headache for you when you're sending your build for QA testing.
Right.
And so in terms of testing itself, I usually have been using Jenkins, I've been using Bamboo, and that's mostly what I think most of the folks are using that for the most part. And all of them have plugins for Unreal and other game engines also, so you're able to then push your build over through like Perforce or through Git, and then you're able to then get those automatic. And of course, to do the automated testing rather, the developer has to write those automated
Right.
tests in a fair manner, because I have seen folks who just write if true, just pass the test, which is a complete BS kind of a true test. So you got to also be aware of writing fair and reliable tests for your games. And
Mm.
once you do that, trust me, it will save you a lot of time and headache.
Right, right. And I think apart from that, I'll just add one point. Automated testing is very game specific. So a few things you
Mhm.
can have generic solutions, but for gameplay testing, if you want to invest time, maybe automate your gameplay. So like, for our game, what we are planning, we'll have AIs. We will just
Mhm.
try to replicate the same gameplay. They will try to
Right.
pick up items, shoot, and all those sort of things.
Yeah,
So that you can also do, but
that's right.
it's
Yeah.
so if it makes sense, do it. All
Yeah.
right, Arvind, I think we are out of time now, but thank you so much. Some really, really important topics discussed. We can go deeper in those, but I think it was helpful for everyone. Thanks, Arvind.
Yeah. Thank you, Avinash, and thank you, Lila. And hey, JK, how you
Hey,
doing?
hey,
Uh,
doing well. Thanks, Arvin.
uh,